It's the summer of the year 2000, and the debate over safety in NASCAR has reached a fever pitch. Dale Earnhardt has heard enough. A restrictor plate was planned for New Hampshire, the track where both Adam Petty and Kenny Irwin had recently been killed. It was a well-known part of the Earnhardt mystique that Dale Earnhardt hated restrictor plates. There's no such thing as too fast. Take them damn things off and let her rip. People are talking about seat safety, and getting Earnhardt to update his antiquated, heavily cushioned bus-style seat was only a recent development, and it had been like pulling teeth. And using a full-face helmet, that's out of the question. It all boils down to the fact that Dale Earnhardt has walked away from violent crashes many times, so he's not about to consider changing anything that had worked for him for so long. Bottom line, these new kids whining about safety, not to mention the veterans who were listening to them, are soft. And in Dale Earnhardt's world, he'd take a bite out of those wimps, chew them up, and spit them out just as fast as he could get to them on the racetrack. A week before the return to New Hampshire, Earnhardt had 4 of the sport's most influential journalists gathered in the Richard Childress Racing Transporter in Richmond. Out of that conversation comes one of the most infamous quotes in NASCAR history. Said Dale Earnhardt that day, "You know what I think of all those drivers who think racing is too dangerous? I think they all ought to tie a kerosene rag around their ankles so the ants don't crawl up their leg and chew their candy asses off." His fans loved Dale Earnhardt for that kind of machismo. Dale Earnhardt ain't scared of nothing. Such fearlessness had long been a part of the Earnhardt brand for years. The Intimidator, the man in black, one tough customer. What it also did was set Earnhardt and like-minded competitors throughout the garage against those who were open to safety improvements. And caught squarely in the middle was NASCAR. Were you going to be the one to tell Dale Earnhardt that he had to change his approach to safety? He was the one driver then, or perhaps ever, who had the kind of power to simply refuse what he considered to be such nonsense. The dark and ominous clouds on the horizon were getting closer and closer, race by race. Dale Earnhardt's candy asses quote from his Richmond tirade was just the tip of the iceberg. Along with taking aim at those he considered afraid to race, he also went after a long-time target, full-face helmets. It's like somebody puts a noose around your bleeping neck and throws you off the bleeping gallows. Earnhardt wasn't finished. Next, he remembered a crash in the 1986 edition of the Firecracker 400 at Daytona. "I hit the bleeping wall at Daytona. Hit the wall head on. Climbed out of the bleeping race car, had the breath knocked out of me bad. My chin was bleeding. You know why my chin was bleeding? 'Cause I cut it on my buckle. If I'd had a full-face helmet on, it would have pulled my bleeping brainstem out." There was no greater a name in the world of racing safety than Bill Simpson, who had helped save more drivers' lives than any 500 safety workers over the years. The man who would be caught up in a firestorm of controversy following Earnhardt's fatal accident had once brought his friend a gift to a Daytona test session. "Just try it out. See what you think. Maybe you'll change your mind."
He swore me to secrecy, I can tell you now. I made a full-face helmet for him. We were testing him. We weren't. They were testing down in Daytona, and he was in his Busch car, and I made the helmet for him special. And I made a mold for him. I mean, it was marked specifically for Dale. And I took it down there. I said, "Do me a favor, would you please? Just put the son of a bitch on and run a couple of laps."
Earnhardt did wind up taking the helmet out for a spin on the track, but not for long.
So he leaves the pits, second lap by, the window net comes down and that helmet comes flying out of that car. He's running about 180 or 190 miles an hour, and the helmet's going bang, bang, bang. So, and he comes in and I said, "I guess you really don't want to wear one, do you?"
Richard Childress racing engineer and team manager Bobby Hutchins helped come up with a head and neck restraint system that was comprised of a series of straps that wrapped around the upper torso, attached to the helmet, with the whole thing being anchored by the wearer's crotch. Developed by Robert Hubbard and Jim Downing, the head and neck support, or Hans device, was essentially a hard neck collar made of carbon fiber that attached to the helmet and was held in place by shoulder harnesses. Kyle Petty had used an early version of the Hans in a race or 2 years earlier, but found it to be bulky and uncomfortable. The contraption came and went and was virtually forgotten in NASCAR circles. Representatives of the Atlanta-based company were having a difficult time at best in reestablishing a foothold in NASCAR before Brett Bodine came along. He was at least willing to listen.
We had gone through some bad times.
Mm-hmm.
We lost some of our colleagues. And race car drivers are funny. They don't want to talk about that stuff. And they want to keep doing what they're doing because that's what got them there. I want the seat the same. I want the same belts. Because if I'm standing here today okay, it must have been okay because I survived what I've been through. But the one thing that was happening in our sport, we were going a lot faster. Every year we were going faster and faster. Technology was really creeping in. Cars were getting way better. Tires were getting way better. The radial tire brought speed. Engine development brought speed. Aerodynamics brought speed. And we were going faster and faster. And we were hitting the wall harder.
When Bodine showed up for the season's second race at Pocono wearing a Hans, there were those who looked at him as if he had two heads. And Dale Earnhardt, yeah, he had an opinion and wasn't afraid to share it.
I got made fun of.
I bet.
A couple guys made fun of me. Dale was one of them. And he said, "What are you, some kind of pussy? What do you need that thing for? You can't see with that. You can't turn your head." I said, "Dale, we all need to look into this."
Dale Earnhardt and Brett Bodine came from two different racing backgrounds, and it showed when it came to their stances on safety.
I'd stand at the driver's meeting at the Spring Sizzler at Stafford. Big modified race of the year, first one of the year. You know, there'd be 80 of us standing there at that driver's meeting. And you'd look around and say, I wonder what 1 or 2, 3 of us aren't going to be here next year. That was the world I came from.
Bodine was in for a culture shock when he first went Winston Cup racing. He was indeed in a different world.
I tested a car with a piece of aluminum on the right-hand part of the seat and nothing on the left. And I ran 202 miles an hour around Talladega in that seat. And I came from a world where, man, the modified seats were wrapped around you. We wore head tie-downs that went under our arms. And here I am running 200 plus miles an hour, bouncing up and down in a bus seat. And I was like, we got to do better than this.
Full-face helmets were a no-go for Earnhardt, and so was the Hans. If those were out of the question, Earnhardt was downright fanatical about the way his seats and safety harnesses were mounted in his car. For years, Earnhardt ran a simple Banjo Matthews-style seat that was straight out of the 1960s. It was not much more than a foam cushion on which to sit and a straight back that came up to just below his shoulder blades. The seat was mounted as low as possible in his race cars. He made sure of that following a 1985 incident at Talladega in which a piece of drive shaft from somebody else's car came completely through his windshield, demolishing the dashboard and cutting Earnhardt's face with debris rocketing through the cockpit. Journeyman driver Bobby Hillin once tested Earnhardt's car at Indianapolis, and he found its seat decidedly different from the more modern model that he used.
You know, when I would get in the car and I'd strap in the seat, I could only get so tight in that seat because there's just so much cushion. You can't just keep pushing it down. But then when you get on the racetrack and keep compacting the car down into the racetrack, the seatbelts would get loose, and I would go out, I'd get on the back straight, I'd have to tighten up the seatbelts more. I go through 3 and 4 and have to tighten them up again. I go through 1 and 2, have to tighten them up again. So for just a 2-lap run, I would probably be tightening my seatbelts up 3 additional times, from when I got in the car, in the garage area.
On top of capturing 2 Busch Series championships, Randy LaJoie is also a leading manufacturer and innovator in racing seats for competitors across a wide variety of motorsports disciplines. LaJoie credits Earnhardt for teaching him how to race in the draft, advice that led directly to wins in the Busch Series season opener at Daytona in 1997, 99, and 2001. the day before the 2001 Daytona 500. LaJoie had approached his mentor earlier in the week after watching Earnhardt and his son Dale Jr. compete in that year's edition of the legendary 24 Hours of Daytona endurance race.
The seats in those Corvettes were very similar to what I had. So I was talking to Senior in the Cup garage, and I said, Senior, hey, congrats on that 24-hour deal. Oh, man, that was good. That was cool. That was this, And I was like, hey, how do you guys like that seat? How do you like that seat in that car? He said, that was pretty good. I said, well, I could build you one like that for this car here. And then he put his arm around me and gave me a damn chokehold. He goes, hell, he goes, build one for Junior. He said, he needs one. I don't need one of those things. Okay, no problem.
Here's the thing. Earnhardt, though certainly the most famous and influential, was far from the only safety holdout. Ken Schrader would come to be almost synonymous with the accident that claimed Earnhardt, but that was in the future. In the summer and fall of the year 2000, all the way up to the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, Schrader was as set in his ways safety-wise as Earnhardt.
I had a dream job, driving a race car and getting paid good. I had raced for a living, nothing else, since about 79, and I'd seen plenty of bad things happen at the racetrack, but I don't ever remember anybody forcing me to climb in that thing.
Even though he'd come up through the sprint car ranks using a full-faced helmet, Schrader had stuck with an open-face model once his Winston Cup career began.
I was sitting behind a windshield. When I started, it was a windshield, and back then it was Lexan. But when it started, I didn't see it being, a real necessity.
The same thing went for head and neck restraint devices. Schrader had been presented with options over the years, and he just didn't see the need. It was the old school mindset at work. Just get in the race car, fire it up, and go. Sure, be as safe as possible, but go with what has always worked for you. This new stuff, you can take it or leave it. The sentiment was passed from generation to generation. Ward Burton was one of the last holdouts in the garage to relent and give up his open-face helmet. And the Hans, he was not a fan.
I liked my open-face helmet. I didn't want to change it all. I sure as heck didn't want a Hans. I'm stuck in, back in those days, they've gotten a little better now, but man, they would dig into my collarbones. I mean, I felt like if I was going to hit something, it was going to break my collarbones, both of them.
Like countless drivers before, Ward Burton had hidden injuries in order to keep racing.
Dude, I've taken some hard hits. I even cracked my sternum in Atlanta. I didn't let NASCAR know about it because they wouldn't let me race the next week, but I hit so hard, it broke Ernie Irvin's collarbone. The Busch race in 93. I went to a local friend of mine, a physician, and we made a little plastic shield to put right there where my belts fit down. And I ran that for months.
And Ward didn't tell NASCAR?
Oh, hell no. They would have put me in the sideline probably. So, when I went and got checked out in the infield care center, nobody saw it. But, back in those days, you could fool NASCAR about concussions and all kind of stuff. Nobody's going to sit in my seat.
When it came down to it, Ward Burton liked what he liked, and he didn't like change.
I felt very comfortable in my little cockpit. I'm a small guy. I was senile. You can ask my crew. I wanted my seat exactly where I wanted it, where my steering wheel, the pedals. I mean, I had everything right there, and I felt like I was in my little cocoon, and I felt immortal sitting in that thing. So, I mean, I was fine without all that stuff.
Ricky Craven crashed hard during practice for the inaugural Winston Cup race at Texas Motor Speedway in 1997, and it left him with severe head injuries, dizziness, and double vision that derailed his career. By the year 2000, Craven was at a crossroads. Considered damaged goods by many, Craven was nevertheless trying desperately to find a decent ride. As a result, he could not bring himself to speak out on the safety controversies that were raging around him.
I was very sensitive about weighing in on safety issues.
Were you really?
Because I felt there would be a perception that if I choose to champion safety over performance, safety over desire, safety over being a cup winner, then owners would look past me, and I would be, that I would be I didn't want to be a spokesperson for safety. I wanted to win a cup race.
Instead, Craven kept his mouth shut and focused on convincing owners he could still drive a race car competitively at the sport's highest level.
I was laser focused on what my objective was, what my message was, and it was primarily centered around convincing people that I was 100% healthy and worthy of the next opportunity.
Jeff Burton found himself in a much different place in his career following the deaths of Petty and Irwin. Jeff was coming off a monster year in 1999 in which he had won 6 Winston Cup races, which he felt gave him at least a little bit of leverage when it came to speaking his mind about certain issues. He and his older brother Ward were as different as night and day when it came to their Virginia accents and in the way they approached matters of safety.
That safety thing, I wasn't the guy in the garage buying that it was normal. And some of the theories I was hearing just made no sense to me whatsoever. And so I wanted to get more information. So my wife and I started investing in some stuff, getting some information. And I was hearing a lot of things that I just plain and simple disagreed with. And I thought that it needed to be said. And it wasn't acceptable to lose Adam Petty. It wasn't acceptable to lose, anybody. That wasn't acceptable. And it wasn't okay to just say that's part of the sport. And it wasn't okay to say, well, they're young and not big enough. And no, that's crazy.
Few criticisms of a race car driver are worse than accusing them of being scared. More than 2 decades later, that memory still rankles Jeff Burton.
This was the problem. People thought I was scared, when in fact I was just educated. If I was scared, I'd have quit. But it's stupid to say, well, that's just how it is. That's a bunch of crap. Go to work and make it better. And so it wasn't right. It wasn't right that these young men were getting killed, and it was, I don't want to say being dismissed, but it wasn't being addressed.
That was the climate as the Winston Cup Tour edged its way toward that second Winston Cup showdown at New Hampshire. Everybody had an opinion on anything and everything, up to and including technology that wasn't even fully developed yet. Lessening the severity of wall impact had always been an intriguing concept. In 1994, engineering student Rick Roberts' idea for an energy-absorbing barrier was featured in the pages of Winston Cup Scene. Indianapolis Motor Speedway had another system in place for the 1998 Indy 500, but it didn't get its first real test until a couple of months later during an IROC race the day before the track's annual NASCAR event. Harry Leindyke slammed into the wall on the inside of the track coming off Turn 4 and near the entrance to pit road. That blasted debris from the barrier and the car itself back onto the racetrack. After some tweaks, an updated version was in place for the 1999 Indianapolis 500. When another crash showed similar issues with turning the vehicle toward the track, the barrier was removed. Humpy Wheeler, Charlotte Motor Speedway's longtime president and master showman, conducted a test of his idea for a soft wall product. Humpy had a 5,000-pound Cadillac drop from a height of about 100 feet onto a bed of 4-by-6-foot casings filled with expandable polystyrene. A team led by Dean Sicking at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln was working on ways to absorb energy during wall impacts. It was the birth of what would come to be known as the Steel and Foam Energy Reduction Barrier, otherwise known as the Safer Barrier. Caught squarely in the middle of the two sides, old school and new school, was NASCAR in general, and in particular, Winston Cup director Gary Nelson. Today, there's an almost universal perception that NASCAR didn't take safety seriously until after Dale Earnhardt's fatal accident. The fact is, that's just not the case. It's far more complicated. Here's the problem. The Hans looked promising, but in its newness to the Winston Cup garage, there were many unknowns. Some had the impression back then that the Hans was actually attached to the car somehow. If that's the case, what happens then if the car's on fire and a driver needs to get out quick? In fact, the Hans was held in place by nothing more than the driver's shoulder harnesses. If the Hans held the head and neck in place during an accident, there was concern that the brain moving back and forth would cause damage to the skull from the inside. That crotch strap on the Hutchins, it had to go somewhere on impact, like straight up into the driver's nether regions. You better believe that would be uncomfortable, if actually not cause an injury. On top of it all, Dale Earnhardt was calling fellow drivers willing to consider change, pussies, and candy asses. This was a far more complicated matter than just sending out a technical bulletin telling competitors what was what when it came to safety. How could NASCAR possibly have mandated anything with so many question marks still remaining? What the sanctioning body could do was get to work and begin to study what could and could not be done.
We had started a program with the R&D department in Hickory, or Conover, North Carolina, and we'd already been looking at how to make the sport safer. But the reality was, at that point in time, I was among the people. We built the cars, we raced the cars, we wrecked the cars, we fixed the cars, all inside the NASCAR membership, right? So Banjo Matthews, Mike Laughlin, whoever's building the cars knew more about it than anybody outside of that group. We looked at the damaged cars, we had the best of everything, safety related, within the fences of NASCAR. That was the opinion of myself and I think pretty much the whole industry, who didn't think there was experts out there that were more advanced than us.
This is how rudimentary the R&D Center's early efforts turned out to be.
I did a test on my own up at New Hampshire after Adam's crash and after Kenny's crash. I think it was in the summer of that 2000, where we got 4 street cars and we put styrofoam against the concrete wall in turn 3 at New Hampshire. We just went up there by ourselves and we were running our little program and we had my system, my Redneck system was, it was like, street cars, but they were front engine, rear wheel drive street cars from the, 80s Buick Regal or something, Oldsmobile, whatever, running cars. So what we did was we lifted the back of the car with a forklift, started the engine, locked the steering so the car would go straight, and stuck the throttle wide open. And when the engine was running at full RPM, we let the forklift down so the car would take off. And we aimed it towards the styrofoam barrier, and we were going to measure the forces of what. First we did it in concrete, and then we were going to do it. But it was so random that the car might miss it. We couldn't get the control that we needed. Right. But we learned from that test that we couldn't control the car like we wanted.
Of particular help was the group from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln developing the safer barrier.
That's when we started realizing that, people outside of our fence might be able to contribute.
Calls for some sort of change at New Hampshire became so prominent, rumors surfaced that some sort of driver boycott might take place if nothing was done. Future Cup legend Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt, and others had already seen what nothing more than huge styrofoam blocks at Watkins Glen could do. Throw those blocks up at New Hampshire. Do something. Do anything. It couldn't hurt. Said Dale Jarrett, the defending Winston Cup champion. They've had plenty of time to put something up there. Hopefully it won't happen again and no one will have a problem. But the racetrack has a responsibility. They make enough money up there to put up a barrier. If there is not something there when we show up, I'm going to be very disappointed. Rusty Wallace didn't hold anything back. If something happens again at Loudon and those soft walls aren't there, fans would tear NASCAR to pieces. Still, Wallace held his cards close to the vest about the rumored boycott, saying simply, answering that question doesn't do me personally any good, so I'm not going to answer it. Driver Rick Mast was even more blunt as he recalled a comment by an unnamed NASCAR official in which concerns were expressed about the time it would take to clean up following an impact with a bunch of large styrofoam blocks. Go over there and tell Kenny Irwin's mom and dad that right now and see what they say about it. Or come talk to my family if I was to get killed. That's horse shit. What competitors got at New Hampshire instead of styrofoam blocks and early soft wall concepts were restrictor plates. Jeff Burton led all 300 laps of the event, with Bobby Labonte trailing in second place for 225 of those circuits. As Dale Earnhardt tried to keep from going a lap down late in the race, he and Burton made contact no less than 3 times, and once under caution. Was it just one of those in the heat of the moment frustrations, or was Earnhardt sending the safety-conscious Burton a message? Know your place, boy. We'll never know. Earnhardt died less than 5 months later, and Tony Roper, he had less than 4 weeks to live. Be sure to subscribe here on YouTube and hit the notification button so you don't miss a single moment.